This HBO decision has literally split the fandom in two. The casting of Severus Snape in the new Harry Potter TV series is definitely controversial and bold, and no doubt will change the way we've always imagined this character. I've gathered all perspectives from the fandoms, as well as pros and cons, and I'm here to analyse everything. We'll talk about what the character's really like, the casting of Pezzato as Severus Snape, how the films changed him, HBO's decisions, and much more. So welcome, wizards, witches, muggles, and squibs, back to Spellbuzz. I'm your host, Francesca Williams, and in this episode, we're talking all about Severus Snape. Let's discuss the Snape casting situation. Initially, Pezzato's name had emerged as a potential candidate to play Severus Snape, and this is where some initial doubts from fans started to arise. It wasn't until a few weeks later that the rumours were confirmed alongside the casting for McGonagall, Dumbledore, Hagrid, Quirrell, and Filch. Now, when this news broke, Pezzato's Instagram account was already set to private, and a lot of the news sources sharing this information, especially on social media, had their comments turned off. And this was for a good reason, because shortly after, Pezzato started receiving death threats over the fact that he was playing Severus Snape in the Harry Potter series. Now, regardless of your opinion on this casting, I'm sure we can all agree that sending death threats to someone is never acceptable, and especially not to an actor who is playing a role in a TV series, which is quite literally his job. It's quite absurd, and it was also quite shocking that some of these Harry Potter fans were doing this, because the Harry Potter community is generally known to be quite friendly and welcoming. After this point, some of the OG film members and also J.K. Rowling were also asked to comment on this casting, which just shows how the media were adding to this onslaught of hate. You can see some examples of hate comments often down in the comments below our videos, because they also get left there too, and I'm sure we'll get some more on this video as well. Now, if you are going to leave a comment, I ask that you do it in a way that discusses this topic interestingly and also respectfully. Now, I hope this video clears up some of the haze around the Snape casting, but first I have an important announcement. If the HBO Harry Potter series isn't for you, then great news. You're not obligated to watch this video. In fact, it's completely legal. You can just close this video and go and watch another here on YouTube. No Imperious curse is holding you here. I promise. In order for me to lead a well-rounded discussion, we first must look at the pros and the cons. And let's start with the more critical points. In the book, Snape is described as having sallow skin. Now, this means yellowish, pale, and sickly looking. He's also described as having greasy hair that sometimes has dirt in it, and a hooked nose that looks like a wrinkly old bat. Here you'll see some of J.K. Rowling's original sketches for Professor Snape, and you'll actually see quite a striking resemblance to Alan Rickman, even though I'm sure these sketches came first. I think we can all agree that Pezzato doesn't have these characteristics, but also that he's considered quite an attractive actor, and Snape is not considered an attractive character. I think we can also all agree that the psychological aspects of Snape are very important and often led by Snape's characteristics, his physical look. This is because Snape's psychology is based around the fact that he is an outcast, a loner, different, interested in dark things. His image reflects that. He has greasy hair, which reflects how he is quite lonely and obviously has poor hygiene. His sallow skin reflects how he spends a lot of time indoors. His hooked nose just adds to his striking but quite ugly intending look. On top of this, he is often described as wearing dark clothes as well, and this adds to this sort of loner picture. Who really is at fault here though? And in my opinion, it is HBO. And that is because they keep talking about book accuracy, which seems to be this notion that they keep getting further and further away from with each new announcement. And I think if they hadn't banged on about book accuracy quite so much, I don't know if fans would be quite so shocked and upset, which they naturally were, when they saw the Snape casting, because quite clearly it is not book accurate. It's also interesting to note that fans are also worried about the way that this might portray James Potter and change the story also, because they're particularly referencing the scene in Book 5, Order of the Phoenix, where we see James Potter bullying Snape, James Potter and the rest of the Marauders, I may add. They're worried that because the parts of Snape that James Potter and the Marauders pick on are his physical characteristics, that it will make James out to be a racist. I think this is a good, genuine concern, because if HBO left the scene exactly how it was, that's exactly how it would look. But what are some ways that they could get around this? Well, for starters, they could scrap this scene and the insults completely, which would completely lack depth and really impact the storyline, so let's hope they don't do that. Second of all, they could pick something else for James and Marauders to pick on. Maybe the clothes Snape is wearing, which is something that is related to his physical appearance, but not so much his physical appearance that he can't change, but it's something he can change. We can adapt that to Pezzato like we could adapt it to Alan Rickman. Furthermore, they could also create a new issue for Snape to be picked on for. For example, he could walk a bit funny or talk a bit funny. There is one more option, which I hope they don't go with, and I'm sure everyone else hopes they don't go with, because it would completely change the tone of the show, and that would be to leave it as it is and go through the racially motivated route, which wouldn't really work, especially considered in Harry Potter, Snape is a half-blood, so there is absolutely no reason for him to be being picked on in a racial way, because that's not how racism works in the wizarding world. It's also important to note that Alan Rickman left some big boots to fill, and I'm sure HBO would have struggled a little bit with finding a substitute for him, or basically another actor to play Snape that the fandom would accept. So I wonder if they chose to go with someone so completely different that it almost gives Snape his own character in his own right, a separate identity away from Alan Rickman. To contrast, let's have a look at why HBO may have decided Pezzato was the perfect candidate for Professor Snape. First of all, we have age, because if you don't know, Alan Rickman was way too old to be playing Professor Snape in the films. In fact, he was 55 during the first film, and Professor Snape was only supposed to be 31 in the first book. So Pezzato is much closer to the correct age because he is only 35. And while this wasn't noticeable in the films, it's because on average the cast were a lot older, well, the adult cast at least. And because HBO are trying to be book accurate, they have made the adult cast their correct ages. As we see, Molly Weasley looks a lot younger, and so do the Dursleys. So it would look very odd if they had a non-age accurate Snape. Furthermore, Pezzato also has a very good gaunt look. Not all the time, but particularly during Hamlet, he had this very gaunt, sickly look. And gaunt and sallow go quite hand in hand to an extent, because while sallow also refers to the tone of the skin being yellow and pale, gaunt and sallow both mean a bit sickly and dreary looking, really. And so that would fit Professor Snape very well. Now, it could just be because Pezzato really captured the essence of Snape perfectly. In fact, if you don't know, he is a really good actor. He's been part of the Royal Shakespeare Company since 2012. And also, I don't know if you've seen, but he's been in a lot recently and he is very skilled. And this leads me on to my point about how in the films, they actually cut a lot of Snape's kind of bad bits. And so if they're planning on keeping them in the series, they may have chosen Pezzato because he's a very skilled actor and he'll be able to provide us with this two-faced character that has these really deep sides to him. Not that Alan Rickman couldn't do that, because he absolutely would have been able to, but they just didn't make that choice with the films. I think there's also an element of romanticism surrounding Alan Rickman's portrayal of Snape, particularly because they didn't put all of his quite so cruel bits in and romanticized him a little bit more. There are areas of the Harry Potter fandom who are absolutely infatuated with Alan Rickman's Snape. In fact, they call themselves Snape wives. And within that, they have something called Snapeism, which is basically a religion surrounding Snape. And they believe that they can feel the spirit of Snape within inside them, and they sort of use Professor Snape as a spirit guide, essentially. This is called religious fanaticism, and it's actually a really interesting topic, and there has been academic studies done on it as well. So if you want a video on it, put a comment down below because we can get you a video on that as well. But that may be one of the reasons that the producers decided to sway away from going too close to Alan Rickman, because they do have this fan base who are completely infatuated with him, and maybe they just wanted to start afresh and give the actor and the writers a little bit of wiggle room to do what they wanted to do to add more depth to the character. Next, we have the fact that Lily and Snape were really the main reason why Snape was bullied. Because yes, Snape has always been other, into dark things, and I'm sure, as the Marauders would put it, rather a loner and a bit weird. Absolutely. But I think a lot of the bullying was spurred on by the fact that James Potter was jealous of Snape and Lily's relationship and the fact that Lily liked Snape, despite James seeing him as so odd and different. Maybe the producers just had a complete oversight and didn't even think that the racism aspect would come into it, because really the core of the issue is the Lily and Snape relationship and James's jealousy, which is completely natural for people in those situations. You know, it happens a lot. There's also something interesting with the plot, and I've heard a lot of misinformation recently, and I wonder if it's because people haven't read the books that thoroughly or haven't read them for a long time. And people are saying that Harry suspects Snape in the first book just because he has a feeling. That is not correct at all. In fact, Harry suspects Snape in the first book because, like I said, this is the parts they missed out of the film. Snape is absolutely cruel to all the students, although he does show some favoritism to Slytherins. Nobody likes him, and he is rather a scary teacher. Harry gets this burning feeling in his skull whenever he's near Snape, which he doesn't realise is because Snape's keeping an eye on both Harry and Professor Quirrell, and Voldemort's in the back of Professor Quirrell's turban. But nonetheless, Harry takes it as a very bad sign because it's the professor that is really scary and horrible to everyone and is also making a scar burn. And then he sees Snape's cut in his leg when he knows there's a three-headed dog guarding the Philosopher's Stone, and then Snape hides it. He thinks that Snape is hiding something and is definitely up to something. And there are key points in the plot that show Harry's reasoning for this. I assume the producers saw this because they're going for book accuracy, and they're like, we're going to include all of these points, so it doesn't matter. Now, I have also seen some interesting points being discussed online, more particularly on Reddit. So let's dive into some of those now. The first one is the main thing that people were concerned about in the trailer wasn't in fact the way that Snape physically looked. Instead, it was his costuming. A lot of people had a massive problem with the zipper on his costume and the fact that it looked quite athletic and muggle-like, when really Snape is a half-blood and he has been in the wizarding world his whole life, so he would definitely be wearing more wizard-like clothing. Some people argued that it was because it was to do with the Quidditch match, but also it was kind of making Snape too cool, and he's, like we said before, supposed to be a bit othered and singled out. So that was a big problem a lot of people had, and they felt the essence of Snape was being stripped away. The second one is maybe this series is for a new generation of fans. While it could be for us who have read the books and seen all the films and know it inside out, it might also be for a new generation of fans, and they may just be trying to redefine it, and it might not be something that they see as that important because really they're just more focused on putting the magic into the stories. Furthermore, others have also said that Snape himself is a prejudiced character. Snape himself is prejudiced against Muggle-borns, so why would it matter too much about the colour of his skin? Because yes, although that's the way that we see racism in the Muggle world, J.K. Rowling is very clear that in the wizarding world, racism is only to do with people's blood status. And maybe they even chose to do it to emphasise this point even further, that racism in the wizarding world is not to do with colour of skin, but rather blood status. Harry Potter on the whole is a metaphor for racism and prejudice. You actually see this with Voldemort's rise to power and the fact that he wants to get rid of all Muggle-borns. You can kind of see why they may have also chosen to do this and not thought anything of the colour of Snape's skin, because in the grand scheme of the message of Harry Potter, it actually doesn't come into it at all. The last point on this is the fact that maybe HBO knew it was going to cause a lot of controversy, and that's why they wanted it. Although this seems a little bit unfair to Papa Asedu if this is the case, because they have basically put him on the front lines of a complete onslaught of nasty things being said to him. Maybe the producers were worried that the series was going to flop because they knew diehard fans loved the films too much, and so they wanted to get people talking about it and to keep talking about it, and maybe that is the reason for it. I would love to know what other points that you have heard about this discussion, and it also doesn't doesn't just have to be about the Snape discussion. It could be about the casting as a whole, because if you don't know, John Lithgow was cast as Dumbledore, but he's actually American. In the original film series, it was specified that all the main cast had to be British, so things like that I'd love for you guys to discuss down in the comments. Please remember to like and subscribe, and we also have some stories on our channel if you're interested, and that is the backstory of Snape, Snape and Lily, and also the Marauders. That's all from me today. Bye bye now.